All right, folks, I think it's time to jump in. Um, Maybe we should keep this music the whole time. I don't know, but or you can cut it. I don't know what you think, Rachel.
No,
Um,
we're good. Let's jump in.
but hey, everybody, welcome to the 5 elements of every killer leader development strategy. We are very excited for this, and we're honored that you would join us today. As a company, WildSpark, this is what we have the honor of doing, of serving other companies and giving them a leadership development strategy that might be a little different than what you've heard of. And so, of course, today on this webinar, we're not going to be talking like only about WildSpark. We're just going to be giving very practical tips or elements that we think can really have an impact on your people within your organization. So I want to do some quick introductions real quick. So if you want to go to the next slide, Rachel, my name is Hampton. I'm an account executive here at WildSpark. We've got Josh Swing, which it's his birthday, by the way. Let's get a happy birthday in the chat. We have Rachel, who somehow did not make it on this slide deck, but she's really humble. She made the deck and she didn't put herself on there. She is our director of marketing. And then Corey Tao, or I like to call him Boom Pow Tao, our VP of Ops. He's really the expert here today. We're going to be learning a lot from him. So Corey would never say this, but as I'm introing him, he does so much for us internally at WildSpark. I mean, he's our VP of operations and is really leading so many different functions across our organization, and is just a stellar leader that we all learn from. And so a lot of this content is from him. Over the years, he's had a lot of experience in different leadership roles, and he's even written some books on leadership. And so this is coming straight from Corey. He's going to deliver it to us today, and Josh and I and Rachel may have some commentary. But the last thing I'll say before we hop in is, if you have any questions for us, please put them in the chat. We will most likely wait until the end to go to all of those, but feel free to hop in the chat, put those in. Rachel may respond to you, or you may come back to them at the end. But I'm not going to waste any more time. We're going to hop in. Corey, let's go.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Hampton. Happy birthday again, Swing. So I'm super excited about talking about these 5 elements, and we're going to explain what elements mean in a minute. We're very intentional about using the word element. But I'm excited about it because with all of my heart, I believe that leadership development, that developing leaders, the impact of leaders in organizations, there's just a lot at stake when it comes to that. And from personal experience, and I'll share a little bit about that, and from just research that's out there that is readily available to all of us, there's one thing that's true, and we're just going to rip the Band-Aid off here at the beginning, is that for the most part, as we generalize, leadership development is broken. The general way that we approach developing leaders, and just to back up a little bit, whether you are an individual contributor, you're looking to develop yourself, or you are trying to invest in someone else, what we call the leader behind you here at WildSpark, to be able to develop someone else, or you are the HR leader of a Fortune 100 company and you are responsible for developing thousands and thousands of people, what we're going to talk about today is relevant for you. These 5 elements that we're going to unpack here in a few minutes is true whether you're developing yourself. So when I think about my own personal development plan, I'm thinking about these 5 elements. Or if I'm thinking about building a scaled out leadership development architecture in an organization, I'm thinking about these 5 elements. But generally, traditionally, how we've approached leadership development, it's just broken. And I think about my own personal experience. I've been building tech companies for the last 15 years. And I remember joining my first company as an individual contributor. I was a project manager. And I was invited to be part of a leadership development high potential program. And as I've gone through my career, I've been part of programs like that, management development programs, executive programs. And generally, they all leave me feeling 2 things. One is I go to these events, I go to a conference, I go to a boot camp, a workshop, I participate in something, and generally I feel inspired at the beginning. I feel inspired, I feel challenged, I feel ready to go tackle my leadership world. And then when I go out into my leadership world and I try to apply what I've learned, it just doesn't stick. And it hasn't stuck for me in the past. And as I watch my friends and my peers and talk to other people in organizations, generally that's the result that we get whenever we think about leadership development. It's let's go to a conference, let's do this boot camp, let's do this workshop. And then after that, it's good luck taking that back to the leadership environment that you work in. And so generally, leadership development is broken. Now, there's also a couple of data points out there. If you ever want to have some fun, go research the effectiveness of leadership development programs. And there are tons, literally thousands and thousands of research projects out there. And I just picked 2 data points to share with you to really validate that what we're trying to do generally just doesn't work. At the end of the day, we want great leaders. We want to produce great leaders. We want to become great leaders, but we just don't see that manifesting itself in our organizations, or even sometimes personally, we're not able to move as fast as we want to go when it comes to our own development. And so there's 2 data points here. I won't ask you to guess what these are because there's probably no way that you would guess these. But the first is this, is 60%. And the thing that makes me sad about this data is that I first saw this 60% data metric probably 10 to 12 years ago, and it has stayed the same for the last 10 to 12 years, which tells us that we're really not making progress at chipping away at solving this problem. And this 60% represents this. 60% of first-time managers, people leaders, people who move from an individual contributor role to a manager role, someone responsible for people and producing results inside an organization, 60% of them fail within the first 18 to 24 months of taking on that role, which is extremely sad. Just think about it. 6 out of 10 people who aspire and then are promoted into a manager role are failing in that role within the first 18 to 24 months. And failure doesn't necessarily mean that they're no longer managing or they're no longer leading. It could be that. It could be that they decided this wasn't the path for them and they stopped being a people leader in an organization. But it could also mean that they're still leading, but they feel like a failure. They feel like they don't have what it takes every day to show up, tackle the leadership situations that they're in with competence and confidence. And so 60%, and again, it's sad because it's been 60% ever since I first saw this 10 to 12 years ago. And the second is this, it's 75%. And what this 75% represents is 3 out of every 4 people who leave organizations leave because of leadership challenges or a lack of leadership. And more specific, the leadership of their direct manager. And this data point's been the same too. We always hear that people don't leave organizations, people leave people leave managers. There's actually qualitative and quantitative research out there to validate that. A lot of people leave organizations because they're just not getting the leadership that they need or the leadership that they deserve. And that's a problem. And so these 2 data points are really there to show us that there's something that's just not working the way that we would want it to produce the results that we want, which are great leaders in our organization. And so we believe at WildSpark, this is something that I personally believe with all of my heart. It's a conviction that I have, is that every person deserves a great leader. So we've talked about how a lot of people's experience is that they're not experiencing great leadership, but every person deserves a great leader. Every person deserves to show up every day in my organization, on my team, in your organization, and be engaged by a great leader, engaged by someone who's creating a safe, trusting environment, engaged by someone who is creating a space and environment where people can bring their best, or people can operate out of their strengths, or people can get feedback and be challenged and celebrated and championed along the way. But we believe that every person deserves a great leader. But we also believe this, is that every leader deserves to be positioned and equipped to be great. That every leader deserves to be positioned so they show up every day in a position to be successful, equipped with what they need to be successful. So when they look down at their leadership tool belt and they look at all the tools that they have, they feel competent and confident to pull out the appropriate tool given whatever situation they find themselves in as a leader. And so we believe this. We believe that every person deserves a great leader, but also every leader deserves to be positioned to be great. But then the question is, okay, well, how do you do that? How do you develop leaders in a way to where the leader feels like they're positioned to be great and they're equipped with what they need to show up every day and have what it takes to be successful? And the byproduct of that is that every person experiences a great leader. So how do you do that? And that's where these 5 elements come in of what it takes to develop a great leader. And we're going to unpack the elements in a second. But before we get to that, what I want to do is I want to provide a filter or a frame for how you think about the word element. And we're going to take a journey back. It's a longer journey for me than it is for Hampton or Swing. But let's take a journey back to high school chemistry real quick. And you guys can put this in the chat. We're going to take a chemistry quiz real quick. So water, which you see on the screen here, water is made up of what elements? Think back, periodic table of elements. You learned about all these elements. You learned about that when you combine them together, that they interact with one another in a specific way. But what makes up water? This is an easy quiz. What elements make up water? Hampton, I think you are the one that probably is the closest to chemistry than Swing or me. So I'll ask you, like, what makes up water, Hampton?
Well, I'm also a little bit concerned about the lack of participation in the chat here. I mean, do we not know the answer to this? Oh, Francisco, you saved me.
Woo! You're right. So if you think about it, in fact, I thought this was a great idea, but I took my chemistry was called zero period chemistry. And you probably can infer what that means is that somehow when I was a junior in high school, I thought it was a great idea to take chemistry an hour before actual school started. And let me tell you, that was a long year with Mr. Kane in the chemistry lab. But if you think about oxygen, so water is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. And so when those 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atoms are bound together, they create water. If you only have 1 hydrogen and 1 oxygen atom and you combine them together, honestly, I'm not even sure what you get, but I do know this, you do not get water. If you have 2 hydrogen atoms and 2 oxygen atoms and you bind them together, you get what's called hydrogen peroxide, which is, maybe you've heard of that before. So if you want hydrogen peroxide, then those are the elements that need to be bound together. But if you want water, if water is the result that you want, then you need 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen bound together to get water. And so when we talk about, we have this metaphor of water and H2O, and wanted to frame that up because when we talk about these 5 elements, they interact in the same way hydrogen and oxygen would interact to get the result of water. And so if you want to get the result of great leaders in your organization, then these are the 5 elements that need to be in place with intentionality and with consistently in order to make that happen. So we're going to spend the next few minutes unpacking what the 5 elements are, and you can see how they interplay and interact with one another. But all 5 need to be in place. If your desire and aspiration is great leaders, we want great leaders that everyone deserves, and we want them to be able to show up every day feeling like they have what it takes to be successful, then these are the 5 components or 5 elements that need to be in place. All right, drum roll.
Good. Hey, Corey, can I hop in really quick? I nerded out on your H2O analogy that you laid out here, and to even stress the importance of this, I thought to take the illustration one step further. So you mentioned like HO2 would be hydrogen peroxide, which is like if I'm thirsty as an individual or as a team, as an organization, and I need water to be able to grow and to continue to thrive, what I don't want to do is drink hydrogen peroxide, because what's going to happen pretty soon after that is I am going to die. And it reminds me of the quote from Jack Welch that says, if our external growth exceeds our internal growth, then disaster is imminent. So what happens, it's not that you just continue, course, or things just stay the same, status quo. What actually happens is a negative effect if we get this mixture wrong. If there isn't a great leadership development strategy in place with these key elements, then it can be detrimental to an organization. It's how teams crumble and organizations crumble. And so I just wanted to sprinkle that in there. Also, fun fact, if you just do hydrogen, then you just talk really funny. I don't know if anybody's ever sucked hydrogen out of a balloon, but you just talk with a really high-pitched voice. So nice. Also probably not what you want from a leadership perspective, but had to interject there.
Yeah, awesome. So good. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So what we want to do is we want to just walk through what the 5 elements are and give you some practical understanding of what that might look like as you implement this. And again, before we unpack these, regardless of what seat you are on the bus and what your role is, whether you're a people leader, positionally a leader in your organization, or someone that's an individual contributor just looking to expand your influence, all of this is for you. So when I think about my own personal development plan, I'm thinking about making sure I have these 5 elements in place. If I'm thinking about mentoring another person that I may not be directly responsible for, but I want to help them along on their journey as a leader, I'm thinking about these 5 elements and making sure that they're in place. Or if I am responsible with an architecture for leadership development across tens or hundreds or thousands of people, I want to make sure that these 5 elements are in place. So number one is this, and I'll say this. This is generally what most leadership development programs get right, is that it's the content. Every leadership development system or architecture starts with some level of content and tools. The problem with most other leadership development programs is that this is where it stops. And so we're going to unpack the other pieces that need to be bound together. But generally, this is what happens is there's some curation of content. And what we believe here at WildSpark, to give you an example, is that we believe that the content that we create within our product that is very intentional. It's very intentional in the way it's delivered, to where it engages the head, the hands, and the heart, but also very intentional on what it focuses on. For example, we believe that there are 10 fundamental leadership capabilities that every great leader needs to be consistently developing. And so when we think about the content that we curate, we're thinking, how does that content equip a leader in this specific capability that we want to build within our organization? And so as you think about content, it's not just pull a book off the shelf or throw a few podcasts out to people. It's thinking about what capabilities do you want to elevate or do you want to develop within your organization? And then curating the content around that would help introduce people that you're investing in, or even introduce yourself to leadership principles, to frameworks around leadership, to pragmatic tools around this idea or this concept. So think about that as you think about leadership content. And to give you an example, and we'll use this example as we go through the rest of the other 4, is think about if you want to develop the capability of giving and receiving effective feedback. That's one of the 10 that we believe that is a capability every great leader, every growing leader needs to be consistently investing in and growing in. If you want to do that, and by the way, if you want to deep dive in how to give effective feedback, last month on the webinar, our WildSpark team really took a deep dive into this idea of feed me feedback and what feedback should look like and how to be equipped to give effective feedback. So you can go back, rewatch that to take a deep dive. But if you want to learn how to give effective feedback, you want to start by creating some content or grabbing some content that's going to explain why feedback is important in the first place. Like, as a leader, why should I even care about learning how to and building the capability to give effective feedback or to receive feedback? I need to learn about the different components of feedback. Feedback is not just constructive, it's also celebrating and championing people. But there's also the challenge piece. I need to learn practical ways that I can give feedback. Maybe there's a tool that I can use that will help me think through the next time I want to celebrate or champion someone, or maybe there's a tough conversation that I need to have to be able to give feedback, or maybe there's a framework to filter and frame up how I receive feedback and how I should respond to feedback. So if that's a skill that you want to develop in your organization, let's start with this idea of leadership content and tools. And so I know, Hampton, you deal a lot with this. You talk to hundreds of people around leadership development in general and the role that you have, and you hear this a lot, I know, around how people are trying to do this part of the 5 elements.
Yeah, and I think that content is where it all starts. When we talk to HR leaders or executives that are trying to build out these strategies, it's never like we have these 4 other elements, which we'll talk about in a minute, but we don't have content. It typically starts with some form of library of resources or training that they're putting on an organization, or maybe a conference they go to. So imagine you send all of your managers to a conference, and at that conference, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, John Gordon, Patrick Lencioni, Susan Scott, Angela Duckworth, all those people walk out on stage and just pour their hearts and souls out. That's going to be an incredible conference. I would pay a lot of money to go there. I'd fill up a notebook with notes. However, I think that's where it stops sometimes. We consume this really good content. We watch the good TED Talk. We spend all the money on the content. You cross your fingers and hope your managers do it. And then that's it. And I think aggressive learners, maybe 10, 15, 20%, if I'm generous, of people in your organization might have the maturity and the desire to really consume that and figure out ways to put in action steps. But a lot of times that information, without some of these other elements we talk about, isn't really going to be helpful. It's kind of like, no offense if I'm calling you out here, but maybe you have a treadmill that's been in your basement for 20 years. Like, we buy the treadmill because we think that itself is going to solve the problem. but maybe we don't have some sort of like plan in place or an accountability partner, or things of that nature. So content is extremely important. You can't develop leaders without it, but these other elements are absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And we'll
So
get into
good.
those.
Yeah, no, so good. So just like our illustration back in metaphor of water. So this is, let's say, hydrogen, right? This is one of the elements that need to be bound together with the other two. All right. Number two, as far as elements needed, is a guide or a Sherpa. And we use the word in WildSpark, Sherpa. Now, on the next slide, there's a picture of a Sherpa. A Sherpa is an actual people group that will if you have the life goal or the aspiration to summit Mount Everest, one of the first calls you should make is to a person like this, is to a Sherpa. Why would you call a Sherpa? It's because if you try to scale, if you try to summit Mount Everest on your own, good luck. That would be extremely treacherous, extremely dangerous, and you may not survive that, because you need someone who's gone before you. You need a Sherpa. And so the Sherpas, they are acclimated to the climate. They've grown up there. They're a people group that's there. They've summited the mountain before. They know the trail to take to get to the summit. They know where all the base camps are. They have gone before to put up ropes like you see in this picture to be able to scale and to climb the mountain. They've laid down ladders to be able to cross over canyons. They've done all that work before you. And so you want a Sherpa as a guide to help guide you up the mountain. The Sherpa, I may be climbing Mount Everest and I look out, I see blue skies, even like in the picture here. The Sherpa could look out and see a cloud formation and say, you know what, that cloud formation is indicating a storm is coming. We should take shelter. I would never see that without a guide or a Sherpa. The same thing is true when you think about development. If you want to develop great leaders, there needs to be a Sherpa, someone or something that has gone before you to lay out the trail and the track towards growth and development, to serve as that guide, to help someone navigate the leadership journey, to help someone take the content that they are being exposed to and the tools they're being exposed to and drive that content to action in the world that they live in, so that ultimately whatever they're learning sticks and habits are starting to be formed when it comes to that. And that's really what the role that WildSpark plays, is this guide Sherpa role. And Swing, I know that you have conversations about this a lot with companies who are looking for this guide or this Sherpa who can help them know how to accelerate the journey when it comes to developing leaders.
Definitely. I have never climbed Mount Everest, nor do I have the desire to ever try to climb Mount Everest. Sounds really hard. But I imagine if I were and I was working with a good Sherpa, that Sherpa would probably ask very intentional questions to gauge where the individual is at so that they can best lead them up the mountain. I would imagine they don't just have like a blanket one size fits all strategy to getting up the mountain, or a lot of people would not make it. And so I think that this is really relevant. We just need somebody, or I guess something in our lives, to help ask us the questions that are going to allow us to unlock the application of it, and how we're thinking critically about it. But Corey, if I'm hearing you correct, the Sherpa doesn't necessarily have to be a person, correct? Could it be like a system? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it could be a system that has been designed to help people navigate through a learning experience and help drive to the action that ultimately we need to take, and drive even accountability around the action. And we'll talk about a couple of the last two elements, really the last two elements that'll drive that home. But it could be a system. It could be a system like WildSpark or another system that is playing the role of a guide or a Sherpa.
That's good. Yeah, my immediate reaction to that was just the way that I interact with WildSpark Lessons, the questions that it's posing to me as I'm going through the content, and the way that it's getting me to think critically about the personal application of it. Like, what does this mean to me? What am I going to go and do now with my team as a result of this dynamic new principle through the content, like you were just talking about, Hampton, a second ago, to get me out of just consumption mode and into application mode is really important for me personally. So this is, man, it's spot on. You're hitting me in the chest here, Corey.
And by the way, if you have an aspiration to climb Everest, I heard about this about a month ago. There's this event called 29029. I know that's backwards. 29029. It's here where you have 36 hours to climb 29,029 feet, the equivalent of summiting Mount Everest. And so you would scale up and down a mountain however many times that is. So if you have an aspiration to do that, then you can just Google Everest 29029 Everesting, and you can get more info about that. All right, let's move on. All right, number 3 of our elements is the idea of a community. So here's what we believe at WildSpark. And Swing, I'll let you kind of unpack this further. And I would say at WildSpark, but it's just the conviction that I have. I believe that life change, that development itself doesn't happen in rows, it happens in circles. And so it doesn't happen in sitting in a row at a conference. It happens when we're sitting at a table with other people and we are interacting with one another. And so we believe that. We believe that if you want to develop, if you want to become and you want to develop great leaders, if that's the result you want, it has to be done in the context of community. And Swing, I'll let you unpack that because you're as Hampton mentioned, you got in celebration of the World Cup, Swing has his soccer captain armband. He's not wearing it today, but he's the captain of WildSpark, which means he's awesome at helping us make sure that this element is always in place.
Yeah, this is community is my jam. I love connecting people and getting to serve others. And so I'm super passionate about this. The phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, comes to mind is even you're teeing me up, Corey. And Hampton would rephrase that as saying you're prioritizing intensity over consistency. And what happens if we try to go too fast, too quick, is burnout happens, right? You come in hot with your New Year's resolutions, and then you burn out after the first 30 days, and you don't see it through. And so what I know to be true is that we need other people to help us go far, to hold us accountable, to sustain that growth that we want to see. We just vastly underperform when we're left to our own demise. If we want to make sure that we're growing the way that we want to grow, we need to put other people around us to be able to hold us accountable to that growth, because we're much more willing to let ourselves down than we are to let other people down. Visibility is a great motivator for accountability. So for an example, illustration, I'll come back to like the health and fitness example. If I'm coming into January saying I am going to run now, like I'm going to start running, and if it's just me getting up in the morning to run by myself at 5:30 a.m., I am at risk to hit snooze 5 times and oversleep and then rush to work last second. Whereas if I know all of my friends here on LinkedIn that are joining us live today are waiting on me to show up to a run group to go run with them, and I'm going to let everybody down if I don't show up, I am much more likely to get up when that alarm goes off and to show up, because we don't want to let other people down. And so what's really important is that you get a group, a tribe together that's going to go through this with you, that isn't going to be afraid to ask you the hard questions of, hey, you said that you were going to start doing this. Tell me about how that's going. And that ultimately is going to be the biggest driver for our growth, is having people like that around us. So I'll get off my soapbox here because I'm just way too fired up about community.
That's so good. Even if you think about it, let's go back to when we talked about wanting to build the skill of effective feedback, for example, and the power of community in the context of that. So generally, whenever you try a new skill, it doesn't go the way that you expect it to or want it to the first time. And so if you're ambitious and you're like, hey, I've been taught why and how to give effective feedback. I have this conversation that I need to engage in. This guide or Sherpa has helped me unpack why it's important and how to do it. And now I'm going to go do it. And I'm going to sit down across from Swing, and I'm going to have this conversation with Swing where I have feedback that would be helpful for me to share with him. And it doesn't go the way that I think it should. That Swing reacts in a way that catches me off guard, or Swing looks like a deer in headlights, or Swing is like, this is really weird because you've never done this with me before. You've never shared feedback. If we are not connected with community, generally what will happen in that situation is that over time, if that happens time and time again, and we don't have someone helping us interpret our experience, we'll probably just stop doing it. And that's what happens a lot whenever we are in isolation and we don't have this community element as part of our leadership development architecture, is that we don't have the infrastructure in place to encourage people to keep going or help interpret experiences so people draw the wrong conclusions about the applications or the habits that they're trying to form when it comes to leadership development capabilities. So good stuff. All right, number 4, I'll go through number 4 and 5 here real quick. Number 4 is that there are standards and habits that are clearly articulated. So if we're gonna cast a vision for great leaders, we have got to tell people what a great leader looks like. We have got to set a bar or clearly articulate the standard of expectation for what a great leader does and what a great leader looks like, and what habits do we want great leaders developing and modeling within the organization. And so you can't leave this out. You can't leave out the fact that we have to tell people what great looks like and define the capabilities or the expectations that we have for the leader within the organization, and what habits do we expect them to be consistently and continually developing as a leader, which would tie back to the content and the community. And what happens in the community is that the content should be helping equip people to rise at or above the standard and develop those habits that we want leaders to develop.
Yeah, and back to what Swing said earlier, I learned this from my friend Teddy, but he says that people oftentimes, whether it's in leadership development or anything, they prioritize intensity over consistency. And so what that would look like in this scenario, and I hear this a lot from my HR friends who have wonderful intentions, is, well, we kicked off the year with a great conference. And I said, okay, well, what's the plan for the next event? Well, we kind of do things as needed, or we got really busy, or people got burnt out. Or a lot of times we have these several different leadership topics. And some of the questions I get is, well, can we just do all of them in 2 months? And I think the desire is to just turn on a switch or press an easy button or take a magic pill. And really what we found, not just with leadership development, but anything in life, being consistently good is much better than occasionally great. Like, we want you to show up every single month and make this a part of your rhythm, your cadence. And so just an example at WildSpark, what you can really expect from us and from your people is to say, hey, we want to spend 1% of our time at the minimum doing leadership development, doing a WildSpark. And what that will do is it will build the habit, and you can start really small. And a question I would like to ask is, if you can't commit 1% of your time to growing and developing your people as leaders or growing yourself, then it might just not be something that you care about. And then if you don't care about that, then maybe have a date with yourself, because I think everyone would agree that this is really important. And so just know that what we're saying is, we're not asking you to pull everybody out of the office or out of the field for days at a time. Those can be good, those mountaintop experiences, but really we want you to just build this as a part of a rhythm into like your monthly workflow.
Yeah, that's so good. And to think about it back practically to the idea of giving effective feedback, that we've used that along the way, is when you're talking about standards and habits, maybe they look like, hey, we expect all of our people leaders to be engaging in or creating an environment where feedback can happen every week during the one-on-one. And we're going to equip them with questions to ask, we're going to equip them with a structure to use, but we want our leaders asking for and creating the environment for feedback to happen. And we want that habit to be built so that everybody in our organization knows that once a week they're coming to a space where, if there's feedback to be given, there's a space and environment created to do that. Which leads us to the 5th one here, is that you've identified the standards and the habits, you set the vision for what it is, then you have to be able to measure it. If you can't measure it, then it probably doesn't matter. And so a lot of leadership development programs may not have this component, or systems may not have this component, but you have to be able to engage the person being developed along the way so that they understand where they are on their journey, and to be able to demonstrate growth or demonstrate a gap that they need to lean into for further development. But as someone's going through this process of being exposed to capabilities and content, they've been part of a community, they have a guide or Sherpa connected with them, they're clear on what the standard is for what it needs to look like. They're not quite there yet, but they're clear what it is. How do you create a system so that you can measure the progress and measure the growth of a person, and even measure the growth of a capability? If there's a specific capability that you want to build in your organization, how do you measure where you are as you invest time and money into it? And so this is a critical element. It's the hydrogen and the oxygens bound together. This is a critical element that you need in place along with the other 4 to ultimately be able to produce and get the result of great leaders in the organization.
This is I would agree, Corey. This is super important, even based on my experience working with a lot of people thinking for leadership growth and thinking for the individuals within their organization. What happens a lot of times is you're having to prove some type of return on investment in something like a leadership development strategy, whether it's just time and energy that you're putting into it, or whether it's a financial investment, you're paying for a system or a tool or content to be able to help you facilitate it. And it's really difficult to do if you don't have some kind of structure set up. Corey, I'd love to ask a question to you. What are some of the practical ways you'd say you can measure that leadership growth? So what are some of the things that you would look for to provide some very clear measurables to be able to prove that return on investment that you're getting through leadership development?
Yeah, I think that if we're talking about it at a capability level, so let's say effective feedback, I would measure against the baseline standard. And a lot of the questions is, well, how do you measure skills that aren't necessarily the hard skills, right? It's not about how many widgets did I create or how many lines of code did I write or how many calls did I make. These are things that are a little bit harder to measure. And what I've seen be successful is generally you have multiple layers of evaluation. There's the self-evaluation, and then ultimately there's the others evaluation. At WildSpark, we call it 360 leader development. It's a value that we have, is that we expect everyone to give north, south, east, west feedback. And so there's this element of I need to be able to understand and measure where I think I am, but then I need my peers, or I need 360 north and south, some other evaluation of where others think I am based on their experience of me. And what I've seen happen is that I can often think I'm at point B. Others may say, no, you're really at point A. And so it creates a gap that I need to lean into for further development. And so I would say that, for us, it's looking at, okay, where are we starting? Where's the baseline of where we are today? Where do we want to go? We're gonna at WildSpark define and do all these elements and path to get there. But along the way, we want to measure it. And that's going to be part of me evaluating myself and others evaluating me, and then responding to the outcomes of that with what do I need to do next to further my development with could be a specific capability, or it could be just generally how am I performing as a leader. But I do think what you see is the indirect impact of this on other metrics that companies think are important, which are engagement, for example. You see engagement go up, you see attrition go down. That's when we talk about there's a lot at stake in investing in developing consistently great leaders when it comes to business results. There's a direct correlation to business results and leadership. And you can see that through all kinds of research that's out there if you really want to dig deep into it, but there is a correlation to that. So there's a direct measurement, but then there's the indirect. There's other business outcomes that are impacted by having great leaders in the organization.
Austin, great question. We will get to that here in a minute. Briefly, we want to show you just a quick picture of what WildSpark looks like. And of course, you can't see it all here, but just as we've unpacked these 5 elements, I want to say that there are organizations that are doing these 5 elements well, that don't use WildSpark. It's not like WildSpark is the only answer here. But a lot of the feedback we're getting from our clients is, hey, I tried to build out this system, and whether it was, difficult sending out content to people or making sure that there was like a guide or Sherpa or a system or the community aspect, it seems like 2 to 3 of these elements can always be a challenge. And so what we've tried to do is package this really well through our system in WildSpark. And so, Corey, Josh, you can hop in where you want here, but just as I briefly run through these 5, the content and the tools, the content's right there. So for example, every month you're going to get a leadership lesson on one content topic. So you can see here the Celebrate Champion Challenge. That is from our unit called Feed Me Feedback. So you would spend 30 minutes going through that lesson on your own. That's the content. And we do it in short learning bursts to where you can do a little bit one day, a little bit the next. So as far as a guide or Sherpa, I would say that's 2 different things. Our system and our platform is a primary guide to where you're not having to ask what's next. We script all the critical moves for you, but also there's a team leader / team facilitator element to this, where after you've done your lesson, you will gather around a table, because we like people learning in circles, not in rows, and actually have a conversation about what you learned. And we will provide one person in that group with a guide to help facilitate that conversation. And if your organization's using it with 500 people, we'll split you into 50 groups and we'll do trainings for those team facilitators to where they don't have to be the expert. They just really need to be able to facilitate, and we'll provide them with that guide. The community piece is what I just talked about. Growth happens best in the context of community. So yes, go through the content yourself, soak it in, but then come together and actually have a conversation. Because what we hear is you get to hear different perspectives from people and ultimately create action steps and accountability from that community. There's also an element of the technology that you can't see in this picture to the side, where you're able to see in real time people learning and growing. So a company that's using this with 500 to 1,000 people, you're seeing impact statements of, hey, this is what I'm learning. This is how I'm growing. And you can see it in real time happening. The standards and habits, it's just right there for you. And so you're going to get reminder emails that says, this is exactly what's expected from you from WildSpark this month. And so it's very simple. No one's ever guessing what you have to do. And then finally, the measurement piece, there is a tab over on the left where you can see the completion of lessons. We also provide you with an executive report that shares some of the top impact statements, shares some of the teams that are doing the best. And we also make this fun. Leadership development does not have to be boring. And so we have a leaderboard to where we gamify this and different teams are competing with each other and everything. So that's another way that we measure this, but won't spend too much time there, but just wanted to give an overview of how these 5 elements could tie into WildSpark. And Corey and Josh, if you have anything to add, you certainly can.
That was great.
Make learning fun again.
Yeah.
Hampton.
Great. Okay, we had a really great question come in from Austin. I'm going to put that on the screen for you guys to check out. What do you do in this situation where you almost need to convince employees of all ages, veteran employees versus new to the industry, the importance of leadership / personal development? That's a great question.
Let him talk to Hampton for
right
5 minutes, and he can convince anybody of anything.
Yeah, so I think I can share what I've done, right, as an example, and Hampton, you and Swing can add your experience, is that I've had to, in the past, create a way to expose the gap. And I've talked about the gap a few times. So for example, and this is, I was looking at, there's a Steve Jobs quote where he says, good artists copy, great artists steal. And so what I've done is that I have stolen from Google. So Google spent millions and millions of dollars investing in a research project that was trying to unlock or unpack what a great manager does. And so they came up with there's 14 questions. It's a survey that you could use with people. And specifically, this is around like people leaders. And so I know that Austin, your question is broader than that, but around people leaders. And so when you have people do that assessment, then you have their team do the assessment. Generally what that does is it exposes a gap between what I think about my intent as a leader, or what I think I'm doing as a leader, and how other people are experiencing me as a leader. And every time I've done that, when people see the gap, they are motivated almost instantly to close the gap and to learn and to do something about it. And so if there are ways in your organization to get people that feedback around what do they think they're doing in any area of their job versus how other people experience it, even could be internal or external people, and there's a gap that's exposed, there will be motivation for people to do something about the gap, and they'll learn about it. And so I've seen that work for me as I've tried to tackle the problem where people may not think that they need development, or they may not think they need to grow as a leader. We can show them that they need to grow as a leader by helping them see things that they just wouldn't see by themselves.
It's good. Expose the gap. # expose the gaps. The only thing that I would add there, Corey, is just to live it first, or like to walk the walk first. So Austin, if I'm empathizing with you and I'm putting myself in in the shoes of somebody who's in an organization, maybe a large organization that doesn't really prioritize leadership development, or it's harder to get people on board with it. And I would say start somewhere. That somewhere is probably just personal. Create that personal plan for yourself using the 5 elements. But then I'd also begin recruiting. I'd begin recruiting people within the organization. And I'm willing to bet that there's, at least 4, 5, 6, 7 other people that you could uncover that do prioritize leadership in a similar way. Start with them, see the impact that it has on those people, and try to measure some of those results, right? Create a baseline before you start with them, and then piece together elements of this leadership development strategy, and then revisit it. Look at some of the measurable results that are happening as a result of this group going through it. And then you have more ammunition to be able to go to some of those less convinced people in the organization and say, hey, I've been doing this with this team for the last 3 months and the last 6 months, and look at the level of engagement, look at the buy-in that this team has, look at their effectiveness in every other area of their responsibilities because of what we're doing here. It's also a great way to prove the results.
Yeah, and Austin, something that you shared here at the end of your question that said, for background, you have burnt out folks at your organization that spend minimal time on this. I can really identify with that because I have worked in the past for organizations where there are just very few resources, and so it did lead to a lot of burnout in nonprofit sector or in high growth startups, pre-funding. That can be the case. And I would say, to piggyback off of what Josh said, one thing that can really help is to go to the burnout folks and ask them, hey, what are the top 3 or top 5 issues? Maybe with the culture, or maybe with some of the day-to-day stuff. And there are systems like WildSpark that can really address a lot of those issues that you might see happening at a systemic level or at a cultural level in your organization. And taking that feedback to somebody in HR, or even just rallying the troops of people who are burnt out and suggesting like a team-based solution where you're not just doing it on your own, that can be really, really helpful as well.
And the final thing that I would add, Rachel, that was great, is that we have to remind ourselves of slide number 3 on this presentation. Leadership development is broken. And so a lot of times what we're doing at WildSpark is tearing down preconceived notions or walls, because a lot of times people put this in the bucket of just another training or a homework assignment or a have to do. And our job is to make this a get to do, where, and there's different ways in which that we're doing this. It's not that WildSpark's the only answer, but we put a lot of stock into having really great kickoffs with our teams to make them fun and talk about the importance of it. It oftentimes helps if you have buy-in from the top at your organization. You might not be able to control that. But I think those are like a few things that help. And then also, when you jump into our content, of course, it is going to help you professionally as a leader, but it also is meant to help you personally as well. And I think when people start experiencing it, they realize that this is helping them holistically at work, but also at home too. And if we're honest, our families and our communities is probably what matter to us most. And so while we're positioning this from an organization level, a lot of times when people go through a WildSpark, they're seeing that, oh, wow, this is really helping me as a person too. And so sometimes you do have those walls that when we jump in, we put a lot of that on us to help you with that. But I do understand that challenge. So thanks for bringing that up, Austin. I hope that was helpful for you. If we've got any other questions, we'd love to answer those. We've got a couple minutes left.
Yeah, if any of you have any additional questions, drop them in the chat and we'll throw them back up there and discuss. But Josh Swing, I feel like you will do an awesome job setting up this December webinar.
Yeah, this is something that's got me super excited. So yes, if questions come in, we can answer those. I know we only have a couple minutes left. The next webinar in December is going to be on something we call the impossible game, how to win at personal development. And it's called the impossible game because it's not because it is impossible, it's because it feels impossible a lot of times to balance all the different areas of our life, our health, our spiritual journey, our relationships, inside and outside of work, and the business side of what we get to do. And so this next webinar is going to be more personally focused, but it's definitely something that you'll be able to take and implement with your teams. If you want to provide a resource to your teams on how to allow them to think strategically about their personal development over the course of 2023. And it's very timely because we're going to be venturing into the new year in January. So our goal here is for you to leave this December webinar with a very helpful framework for how to think about your personal development over the course of 2023 holistically, like Hampton just said, personal and professional. It's something that we just started doing internally as a team within WildSpark, and it has been like a complete game changer for everybody that's on the team from a personal growth perspective. So I can't wait for all of you to be on that one, to hang out with us. And it'll be right around Christmas. So who knows? There may be gifts that go out. Maybe just high fives. Who knows? You'll have to show up to see. Scan the QR code. Register now, people.
There will be gifts, but I'll probably call them GIFs.
Oh, lastly, if you want to hang out with me and Hampton ever one-on-one, you can scan this QR code and it's going to shoot you to our calendar and you can schedule some time with us. We love to talk to people and to build relationships. So feel free to do that too.
Shout out to
all I
Josh's hair in that picture. And it looks like we got a question from Gabe. Corey, do you want to get that?
No, I was just going to real quick here. So the answer is yes, Gabe. We do work with school systems and education. Maybe we could take that offline and talk about that more around what we do there, if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, for sure. For anybody who might also be interested, we work with like secondary education, higher education. So yeah, definitely a lot of stuff we can share there.
Gabe, we're also partnered with the School Leadership Alliance. Is an organization that's doing a lot of work within education, and then ACSI, which is like the Association of Christian Schools International, is another organization that we partner with to help build leaders. So yes, but yeah, we'd love to chat with you offline about it. Jonathan found the cook.
Yeah, if we didn't come back and come full circle to the webinar and make sure we gave Jonathan a shout out, that's a great emoji.
Oh, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. It is 12:59 on the dot, so we're out of time here, but go ahead and just give like a clap to Corey Tao for a lot of this wherever you're sitting. And we are excited to see you in December. See you soon, everybody.